Welcome to part 2 of the Ricochet Basics video. This will be continuing directly off the previous one, so make sure to check that one out first. So we've still got that Quixel Megascans model here, just so we're not using a boring sphere. And let's create another extension or plugin, Ricochet. And immediately I'll change the color of it just so it can pop out. This time we'll use a nice light blue. Why not? So now we can see that laser bouncing or shooting out. I would like to drop in, actually, let's not drop it in. Let's do another object remote link into the model and then hide the model. So now we're bouncing around inside of it. If I deselect, you can see it bouncing around. Okay, cool. The first thing I'd like to talk about now is we were using the total length, but what I would like to do is do count. So what count is doing is instead of calculating the total length, it's like, hey, how many times do you want to bounce? So we can say, I want to bounce 100 times. So there's exactly 100 different changes of directions in here. But where I actually find count to be most useful is putting it to exactly 1. At a length of 1, if I were to take this Ricochet and move it out, let's move it out far enough, you now see that it's going to terminate as soon as it strikes the object, because it's kind of like it's one segment, one bounce. So now if I were to take that and hit R for rotate, and rotate, you can see it's actually stopping directly where it strikes the model. So that's actually pretty powerful. If I were to, let's say, create a sphere, and let's say there's some sort of like sniper laser, I can shrink the sphere down, or a light, but let's use a sphere to be able to see it. Align to spline, and put the Ricochet inside, align that to 100%. Now this dot is going to be always on the end of this Ricochet, and as I rotate this Ricochet, you can see that that dot will travel directly along the model. So that is pretty cool right out of the gate. And then think about this. We could also say, hey, that sphere, I would like it to be traced. So we'll put a tracer on it. I don't want to trace the vertices, so it should just trace the center point of that sphere. And then keyframe. Let's keyframe this Ricochet. So here's a rotation of P. Record that. Fast forward to the end and pull this down to the bottom and keyframe that. Now, if I were to hit play and select the tracer just so we can see it highlighted, you now see that we should get a line tracing the model right on the surface. So just another cool use case of that. We'll be doing a little bit more of that in the future. So just a cool way of shooting a single laser and then terminating it, or creating as many bounces as you want. Let's kill that rotation before I forget as well. Reset the PSR, and now let's go inside of the Ricochet and check out a couple of crazy settings by twirling this down. Now there's the count mode version of these, and there's the total length version of them. Let's stay on total length because I feel like it's a little more intuitive. So let's check those out. If I were to, let's say, twirl this down, and let's first look at growth. So let's put length to 0, and I want a growth of, let's say, 500. Just type in a nice even 500. What this is going to do is grow 500 units, 500 centimeters in this case, over the course of 30 seconds, over the course of one frame. My current FPS is 30, which means this will take 30 frames to get to 500. So if I were to rewind, you'll see there's no line whatsoever. If I play, it's going to begin growing at 500 per second, and it'll just keep growing and growing and growing. If I were to put this up to 900, that'll just keep on growing longer and longer and longer. Now, this is actually an important point to note. An important difference between the way Ricochet behaves and the way maybe a particle system might behave. You'll actually see that no matter where I jump in the timeline, we're going to see the exact perfect final result of Ricochet. We don't need to wait for the timeline to get to a specific time. We don't have to play and let it pre-roll the entire time. If we were doing this with a particle bouncing around and tracing it, you'd have to run every single frame. And this is part of the magic of Ricochet. Everything is pre-calculated. Having said that, everything is pre-calculated, which means every time we refresh, it has to calculate every single bounce that got us there. So you will actually see, and think about it like a particle. A particle on any given frame only cares about where it is now and where it was before. What's its current like direction and velocity, and then it will just calculate its current state over and over and over again. Ricochet is calculating every single bounce that it did to get there so that the entire line can be represented. So here's the important part, is if I hit play, as the timeline gets longer and longer and longer, it is doing more and more and more calculations because there's just more bounces happening. So you'll see my frame rate slowly go down as the line becomes bigger. It is having to do the calculation completely from scratch every time it moves forward. Now, what's important to note is if this is just in regular length mode, and we could even jump that up to 10,000, jump that up to 1,000,000. So there's a 1,000,000 in length here. I can hit play, and it's gonna be running crazy fast because that's cached. It's not updating. It's not changing. So that can be cached really quick. But if we were forcing an update every frame, then it has to do that big old calculation every single refresh. So just keep in mind that paradigm. It's really, really powerful and helpful in certain circumstances, but it can slow things down depending on the type of setup you built. Okay, having said that, that is growth. We can now grow. Now, growth can happen on top of an existing line. Here's a line that's already 3,000 long, and now it's going to be growing extra quickly because I've made it kind of quick, and you see it's growing on top of it. So those combine with each other, and you even have the ability to, let's go back to 500, and you'll see that at the beginning, there's no growth, but I could actually go negative frames, and you'll actually see it's going to rewind and go in reverse, and if I hit play, that will erase out and then go forward. So those combine in interesting ways as well. Having said that, we can get rid of length, get rid of growth, and actually we need some length. And I would like to do rate. We're going to skip over offset for a moment, and let's make a nice short line here. It looks even cooler. So we got really, really short ricochet going. So let's add some rate, and just like before, this is going to travel 500 units, but this time it's not growing longer, it's moving that much. So every single 30 frames, it's moving another 500. So you can see this bouncing around. Let's make it 3 times faster. And now you see boing, 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 bouncing around, doing kind of a cool laser thing. We'd always change the length of it. We can combine these different settings. So I could add growth and rate. So now it is both moving forward and getting longer as time goes. So that's just a way that those combine. So rate is pretty fun, and you can create some really, really neat effects with that directly. Let's get rid of the growth and add a little bit of length and just talk about offset now. What's cool about offset is it's just like rate, but you can manually control it. Like I said, everything's pre-calculated. So keyframing rate would be weird because it kind of backtracks and refreshes forward. So you can't change the speed via rate. But instead of using rate, what if you just keyframed the offset? So you could say, hey, this is going to go forward and then slow down at a certain point. So you could actually, create nice smooth F curves and accelerate something and decelerate it by using offset. And again, offset can be used on top of rate. So those two things combine, and it's on top of length and on top of growth as well. So all those combine. And as I said, there's the exact analogous thing that's going to happen under count. So under count, if we have a count of 1, we can put some rate in there. So let's type in 1. And now every 30 frames, it will move forward exactly 1 ricochet. So that's the next one, the next one, the next one. Each one is a single ricochet. If we wanted it to be like maximum speed, we type in the same as our frame rate. And now each frame is the next bounce. So, all those things combine. Let's take a look at the next feature. We're going to jump into the Modify tab, and we'll be talking a whole bunch about this in the future, especially the multiplier field is fancy, and this works really well with what we just talked about. This is using the MoGraph fields in order to drive our length, growth, offset, and rate using MoGraph tools, which is really, really cool. But that's for another video. In this one, I just want to mention time offset, and time offset is a way of making it so that these settings will see time differently. We currently, if we jump to any given point, this is now frame 120, but we can say, hey, modify, it's actually frame, if we type in 20, so now Ricochet will be seeing the time as 140. So it's a way of offsetting your animation forward or backward, or maybe doing just some funky, crazy time offsets. There are definitely cool places to use it. I don't have a direct example right now, but I've definitely had cool uses for that. So just keep in mind that this time offset works with these automatic animated parameters. And while we're at it, we've also got this point cap. It's just to make sure that you don't accidentally put so many things inside Ricochet that it would, slow down so much that you would kind of freeze up cinema. And the easy way of doing that is like, as I was dragging up this to like 1,000,000, if we put 1,000,000 bounces, and then you're like, okay, cool, we've got 1,000,000 bounces, but you go and feed this into a matrix object, and then suddenly it's going to make 100 times 1,000,000. Like, that could take a while. So anyway, the point being is this is how many points have been generated, and you can always increase that larger just to make sure that you don't accidentally freeze up cinema. Cool. I just mentioned the matrix object, and I think it's time to talk about that. Under orientation, we have an additional mode we didn't get a chance to talk about yet, and that is matrix. So if I were to click on matrix mode, we now get a link field and a create button and a visualize. Well, let's go and manually make a matrix first to explain what's going on. So I'll make a matrix. You see we get this whole grid of 40 by 40. I want 40 by 1. So we just got a single long row of 40 clones. So with 40 different sources, I could say that this is going to be shooting off from the matrix on Z plus, and you'll see on the matrix that Z plus is facing forward. So in the Ricochet, drag the matrix into the link field. And now we have 40 different segments, like 40 different lasers firing forward, colliding off whatever our source geometry is. So you can see how this is bouncing directly off the object. I can now grab that matrix and move it up and travel directly along the entire object. If I were to drag this forward, as soon as any of these matrix objects are inside of the object, we can see them bouncing around inside. Dragging the matrix width, I can squish these together, and now more and more and more, and then eventually all of them are inside bouncing around. You can see that initial bounce in there, and then filling up the object, each with a separate matrix. So that is just creating a bunch of different source points to play around with. So here we could increase the length and let those all fill up the space even more. We could also, this is a cool thing to mention, you see how we very distinctly are seeing all these lines? Well, maybe we don't want that. So I could grab a little bit of offset. Let's say, hey, let's offset these. I'll do it really slowly, you can see. So you can see how these are offsetting from the original point until we now kind of don't see where they came from anymore. And we just get the bounces around. So just a neat little thing to throw out there. But yeah, this is the matrix generating points to go and bounce around. So the matrix, obviously there's lots of different things you do with a matrix object. Let's feed in a random. Now the matrices are going to randomly move around, but I don't want them to move. I want them to rotate. So let's just say, hey, you can randomly rotate 90, 90, 90. And now they've all rotated to new orientations. It's a little hard to see. Let's grab the matrix and pull it back. And now you can see we still get this origin point, but they're all randomly rotated. So if I were to grab the random effector, I'll even make it a child just so we get that association. I can now pull these down or up, and it's going to create this crazy different layout. So that's really fun. Let me show you a really fun example. In this case, we were talking about count, and I was saying I really like using count, and I almost use it in count 1 mode, and now you can see almost immediately why I like it so much. Let's take this and spread it out, and let's even add more. Let's make this 100 on the count. Oh, I guess I have to shrink those in. Let's say endpoint, and now I want this to just be 100 long. There you go. So now I've got 100 matrices, and they're creating they're creating 100 lines. So if I were to grab this matrix and pull it down and start moving it up, we can now get like this scanning effect where the outside of the model is getting traced by exactly what this matrix is outputting. Let's hide fully that original model. And I'm grabbing the matrix, I can pull this down, and you can see the contour of the model. That is awesome right out of the gate. But now let's take that concept a little bit further. Grabbing the matrix object, I'll move it inside the model again. And actually temporarily turn off the Ricochet. And with the matrix, I would like it not to be in grid mode, but let's do radial mode. So now you can see we've got 5 different ones twirling in a circle. Grab the radius and pull it down, so there's 5 just shooting out in different directions. So turning back on the Ricochet, we are saying that there should only be a single count, so they instantly terminate when they hit this wall. Meaning, if I were to grab this and move it down, we can sort of trace this object. Now, it doesn't look like much right there, but let's crank up our count. I want more and more and more and more. Now, with 100 in there, now it starts looking like something. Now we're scanning the interior of this model, getting exactly that shape. So really, really cool, powerful effect. And you see how quickly this goes and how quickly it's refreshing on this, not insubstantial model. So let's take this technique just a little bit further, just for fun. And let's create a brand new matrix object. And I'm going to say that this matrix should clone onto an object. And the object, I'll say, is the Ricochet. I use this formula all the time. What I'm going to do is say I want exactly 1 on the count, and then turn off loop, and then take the offset and increase that all the way. And now there's exactly 1 matrix on the tip of each of these different Ricochet segments. So that's fine. We can grab Ricochet. We can move it up and down. It's on the matrix, so we move the original matrix up and down. So now that that's happening, how about I keyframe that? So keyframe on Y, I'll rewind to 0. Keyframe on Y, and I don't want this running too long, so let's go to 180 frames. At the end, I would like this matrix to have moved all the way up here to the top, and keyframe that. So hit play, and now we can see this tracing along, making that pattern. So that's neat. But what I'd really like to do is grab this matrix and say, you are going to be traced. So I'll put that tracer afterward just so that the order of operations calculates correctly. And visually, I'd like to hide that matrix, so I'll hide it. And let's even see the matrix, or I want to see the tracer as it's going. So let's turn on a display color and say it'll scan in, let's do kind of a pink color. Rewind all the way, hit play. And now I am, deselect it. Now I'm tracing kind of the contours of this model as it scans it upward, all just using a couple of matrices and the Ricochet. And now we get this crazy shape. Let's hide the original model, and it already wouldn't render, but now we can hide it. Rewind a couple times so that the tracer actually refreshes. Play, and now we can actually scan the entire model just using the Ricochet and a couple matrices and the tracer object, and now we reveal the entire model. I just love these techniques. There's so many different things we can do. And just for fun, let's go even a little bit further. It's going to look, I don't even know what this will look like. I'm making this up as I go. But let's put a animation vibrate tag on there. Put on a rotation. Let's kind of go nuts. Say 90, 90, 90. And a really slow frequency because that's a lot of rotation. So now that is going to be randomly rotating as it goes, but they're still getting traced. So let's just see what that does. So now we get this crazy scanner rotating around randomly as it goes. So now you see how these kind of do these little twists. Let's speed that up more than double. Just see what that does. And now we get these crazy wonky scans, but still tracing the overall shape of our, I didn't stop it in time. Scanning the overall shape of the model that we fed in. Of course, we could swap in this for any model that we have. But like, look at this shape. How would we have made this before this? I don't know. So there's just so many cool possibilities here. Even just taking that matrix and spinning it as it went, like these would be twirling around. Ooh, I kind of want to do that right now. This isn't really the time to do it, but if you'll indulge me just for a split second, and actually I have that spin up to 720 and really slowly, 0.01. Hopefully that'll kind of do what I want. And spin, let's put an extra 0 on there. Scanning around, it's randomly rotating, but now you can see that it's twirling as it goes up. And look at that crazy shape we just made. That is so cool. We could do this in a lot of different ways, but look at the model that we just scanned by playing with Ricochet and a couple of matrices. So let's see, is there anything else to cover? Oh, actually, yes, there is. Okay, so we were having too much fun there. Let's go and simplify back. We don't need any of that stuff. Back to the basic Ricochet. And I'll even put this back to Z+, and let's unhide our model. So we're kind of back to super duper basics, back to total length, in fact. So now we're back to essentially the beginning. We're just bouncing around inside the model. We're in, actually I want Z+ mode. That's what I want. So we're in Z+ mode, and you'll notice that when we're in Z+ mode, because the matrix is so important, I want to make sure that people didn't miss it. So I actually created a create matrix button here, meaning if I click on that, it'll automatically, well, first of all, select the matrix, but you'll see that it set it to matrix mode, created a matrix, and then fed it in, and selects the matrix for you so you can change your settings. And you'll see right now that what it did is it created a brand new matrix, made it a child, and it is now created 10 different matrices throughout, and they are on the surface. So let's simplify this or clean it up a little. I'm going to make the length really short. And temporarily, actually, let's turn off the Ricochet, and you can actually see these tiny little matrices on the walls. And we made them extra small just because once you make a lot of them, actually I'll show you here, if we were to go to transform and say that the scale is the default 111, they start eating up a lot of your model visually. So that's why we made them really tiny. But turning back on the Ricochet, it's actually consuming that matrix, so you see it visually disappears. So just as an important detail, we have this visualize checkbox, and it's going to take on the color of the matrix and the scale of it, and that's how this line will be generated to show you the orientation of them. But anyway, the point being is you can just, with one button, the create matrix button, it'll automatically set this up, create multiple copies of a matrix for you, and clone all over the surface. So selecting the matrix, I can say, hey, let's add a whole bunch. So let's make more, and really fill that up. Let's make more. And now you see we're making a ton of them, and we're bouncing around just a little bit. Let's reduce a bit. And then this Ricochet has some very specific settings turned on. As I mentioned, the scale is really small, so they're not visually taking up too much space. But we also have it set to Z minus 0.1 because they're just slightly inside the surface, so they're actually inside the object. And they are flipped around 180, so they're actually not aiming out away from the object, but inside to bounce around. So they're all perfectly aligned with the normals right now. But if we go to random, I can turn that on, and that has a couple of changes to the default settings, which is instead of position, it's on rotation. And it's set to 89, 89, which is like the maximum rotation that we can do without them escaping from the model. So it's just a nice way of getting some variation inside there. So under effector, we could say the strength, pull this down. You can see how it's transitioning from not random to maximum potential randomness as they bounce around. Now, while we've got this matrix created and those are bouncing around, once again, it's really cool to play with count mode. So if we do a count of exactly 1, what this will do is shoot out the Ricochet, shoot out a laser, and as soon as it hits a wall, it terminates. So now we've got a series, we got like 10 single lines. It's just one line and stops. So what's cool about that is if we were to grab that and begin cranking up the count, this is going to fill up with a series of single segment straight lines, and it just fills up the entire object. So just another kind of visually cool way of filling up this space. And there's a lot of different ways of creating a matrix and filling up a space. Like we could make this very geometric by only having matrices that were rotated 90 degrees, and this entire thing could be filled up with 90-degree perfect planar, like X, Y, Z being created. There are so many additional things that you can do, and we haven't even moved into the modifier tab. So believe me, this adds a lot more power overall. So we've got way more to talk about, but that I think is going to wrap up the basics tab. As I've mentioned, you can click this question mark button, and that will bring you to the help page where there should be some documentation as well as a bunch of other videos that you can find, including this video if you ever want to watch it again. And the examples page will be populated over time with more and more different examples to make different effects as I kind of think of other cool things to do with it. So that wraps this video up. Thanks for checking it out, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.